Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers on this journey are me, Guido.
And me, raw but sexy and from the 1940s. Ah. I know.
You were wearing a Page Boy cap the other day, and someone commented that
cap.
it was like you were from the 1940s.
So I hope that reference didn't bomb, but look, there's a bombshell on our screens. It's knockout author and returning guest, Tim Hanley. Hi, Tim.
Hi, great to be back.
Yes, great to have you back.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim. Listeners, make sure you go back and listen to episode 60 from August 2022 for an in-depth interview with Tim about his many incredible books on comics, especially his most recent Not All Supermen, Sexism, Toxic Masculinity, and the Complex History of Superheroes, because it's on that episode that Tim mentioned his love of bombshells. So we knew this episode was an inevitability.
Yes, welcome again, Tim, and thank you. And Guido, what's new in our little corner of the multiverse?
We just launched our Amalgam Minis, our collaboration with Elliott Comic Art. So we have series 1 of these amazing little characters he's drawing where we're mashing up the weirdest and wildest and most fun things we can think of and things that we love. And the result is these characters that you can get from Elliott or you can follow along on our coffee. But my favorite, I think, is probably the Dr. Manhattan Frankenfurter. I think that's a really great combination for Dr. Manhattanfurter or whatever we decided to call him, Frankenhattan.
He's my favorite.
You and I started talking about Rocky Horror and Watchmen, other amalgamations we could conceive of. They actually sort of overlap quite well. So.
Yeah. Definitely. And we have little bios of everyone as well that it's going to be rolling out. So it's not just art. You can get a little backstory too.
Yeah, so that's been really fun. And you can follow our coffee. Even if you aren't going to be a supporter, you can follow us on there because we post a lot of pictures and blog posts. And we do have some fun merch and more to come.
Holiday gifts from our coffee.
Yes, Tim's book makes a great gift, and our merch makes a great gift.
Lots of gift ideas. So while you think of those gift ideas, we'll tell you a little bit about our show. So please tell a friend about us, and of course, leave a review on Apple as well. But if you're joining us for the first time, we have 3 sections of the show: Origins of the Story, What Inspired This Other Reality, Exploring Multiversity, where we will dive deeper into our alternate universe, and Pondering Possibilities, we examine the impact and what's followed or coming in the future. And with that, dear watchers, let's head back to the 1940s and the 1980s, I guess. And welcome to episode 75. And let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with today's alternate universe. And today we are asking the question, what if the DC female heroes were all fighting in World War II as a team called the Bombshells?
So some background on our question and where it comes from. It's the Bombshells Earth. We've never covered it before. It's not technically an Elseworlds in DC. It's not an imaginary story, but it is a fully distinct, fully developed alternate universe without a numerical designation. And a little bit of history, and Tim, please jump in. So in 2011, the origin of this world is that illustrator Aunt Lucia inspired DC Collectibles, apparently at a Comic-Con. They actually saw his work to create the line. And in 2013, they launched with Statues, which became one of the DC Collectibles' most successful lines. It then became a variant cover series on DC comic titles, and that led into the launch of a digital-only comic series, which later got print issues and collected editions. And the comic ran from 2015 to 2019 in 2 volumes, DC Comics Bombshells and Bombshells United. The world has barely been revisited, although we'll talk a little bit about that in the 3rd segment. And there are still toys, there's an art book, there's still some statues, and of course now there are Funko Pops from the world. Did I miss anything on the history of the Bombshells line, Tim, that you want to add?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, it was Aunt Lucia was doing art, like kind of pinup stuff on his own. It's one of the rare instances where DC was like, "Cool, let's work together," instead of cease and desist.
Yeah, I know. It's funny
But
because there's an official video that DC made like 7 years ago telling the story, and they sort of gloss over. They say that Aunt Lucia was doing pinups of World War II that inspired them to think of DC characters, and it's like, well, we've all been to Comic Cons, and we know that's not true. We know that, in fact, a lot of artists use the characters. Yeah, so you're right. It's a funny example where they decided to work together, and hopefully we're fair in doing that.
yeah, and then the variant covers were the first foray into comics. This was when like DC was doing a different variant cover theme every month. And so Bombshells month was their first big jump. And then I think it was like at least another year or so until the actual comic started.
Wow. Yeah, very cool. And I was thinking about also toy lines that have become comics. So other than, of course, examples that are not really comic-y related, like He-Man and Micronauts and Crystar, I was thinking there's Secret Wars, though that's a little different because that is a comic and a toy line coming out at the same time. So they're trying to promote the Mattel toys with the comic. And then there's DC Superpowers, but that's kind of the same as Secret Wars. So there's these 3 miniseries that anyone of a certain age like me had those miniseries. They were so pervasive, but they were done to promote the Kenner toys at the time. So I think this is really interesting that this started as a collectible statues line, not quite toy. And then I was thinking about too, in the McFarlane line, there's actually very recently they do these designed by McFarlane. So there's actually toys that come out like of Wonder Woman that don't exist in the comics. So it's almost like Bombshells. Like maybe one day we'll see a comic series of the McFarlane designs. But that's one of the few examples of the comic book characters who are being created and designed for toys before they're being created and designed for books.
I know McFarlane created a Blair Witch figure too, even though you've never seen the Blair Witch in movies too. So it's kind of like, oh, they're putting the figure out there, and maybe one day they could maybe use that design in a movie if Blair Witch ever comes back.
So yeah, interesting direction that this line, the origin of this line took.
Yeah. And speaking of Bombshells, I was very new to it. So let's talk about our backgrounds with Bombshells. And Tim, love to start with you, since this kind of all came from you mentioning your love of this run on your last appearance on our podcast.
Yeah, so my first introduction to Bombshells was the variant cover line, the first one. I didn't pay too much attention to the statues because I don't have statues. Those things are so expensive. But when they announced the like a World War II pinup style line, I was like, oh, come on, DC. This is... It was 2013. It was not a great era for female characters at DC. And my first thought was, like, with a month of pinup variants, was we don't need this. We've gone through enough. Let's not objectify our female characters even further. And then, like, the covers came out, and they were kind of cool. Like, the costumes were decent, and I was intrigued. But still not, like, super on board. And then the comic came out, and it was Marguerite Bennett, and it was Marguerite Sauvage on the first few issues. I was like, well, this does sound kind of cool. Maybe I'll check it out. And then loved it immediately. Bought every single issue from then on. I've got action figures. I've got... They did a collectible card line. I have the whole set of. So once it turned into an actual story instead of just like slightly sexualized images, they did such a good job with it that I couldn't help but love it.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, Guido, what about you?
I tried, so I knew it existed just by being in a comic store every week and reading comics, but I think like you, Tim, like I was sort of turned off. It just felt pin-up-y, and I didn't even know, even the comic felt that way. I was wrong, and I didn't know that I was wrong, but I just never got into it, and I tried to read it maybe 2-3 years ago, I got the collected edition. I was waiting actually because I was waiting for all of it to be collected in hardcover. That's how I prefer to buy things. And they never finished it in hardcover. So it's stuck only partially collected in hardcover. And so I finally broke down and bought the trade paperback and started to read it, but it didn't hook me right away. I must have not just been in the mood at that point and put it down and didn't pick it back up until preparing for this episode, and picked it up and read all of volume 1 in trade paperback form. So not very familiar other than just sort of knowing it existed. Not familiar with the story at all.
Pretty similar, and I think very similar to both of you. I would see the statues at cons and go, oh, I don't know about that, because they're all a little, let's say, bustier than maybe they're depicted in the actual drawings in the comics. And I was like, oh, and you see that a lot in statues. It definitely feels like it's for the male gaze, let's say. But then I would see more and more female presenting people dressed as the characters at cons and kind of really embracing that aesthetic. And I had then seen the covers, and I actually really had no idea that there was even a comic book run of it until I think, Tim, you might have mentioned, since you mentioned it. And this was definitely my first diving into this world. So let's go a little deeper into that. But first, we'll kind of journey back
we have a detour.
A detour into the 1980s. So grab your headbands and your sweatpants, and it is origins.
And your disco balls.
And your disco balls. It is origins of the story.
Right now on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
Yes, because before we fight evil occult Nazis, we're going to battle a giant alien with the power of disco ball eyes and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? ? And that is Judgment in Infinity, books 1 through 3 from Wonder Woman Volume 1, issues number 291 to 293 from May, June, and July of 1982.
So these are all 3 written by Paul Levitz, who's credited as the plotter, Roy Thomas, who's credited as the script. All 3 are penciled by Gene Colan. The inker on all 3 is Frank McLaughlin, though in 292 he's joined by Romeo Tengal. In 293 he's joined by Bob Smith and Adrian Gonzalez. The colorist on all 3 is Carl Gafford. The letterer on the first issue is John Costanza. In the second 2, it is Ben Oda. All 3 are edited by Len Wein, and there is a special thanks in that third issue to Marv Wolfman. Not sure why. So,
I think because the Teen Titans
Yes,
are in it.
I think so.
Interesting.
Starfire and Raven.
Wow.
They
Cool.
even say thanks for their permission or something like that, where it was like, I don't know if they actually needed Marv's permission to do it, but nice that they did
Right.
give him a little shout out there. So yeah,
let's hear a quick summary, Rob, and then we can talk about why we read this.
Okay, quick summary. The Adjudicator, don't worry, it's a character who never ever again shows up. But he does show up here to pass judgment on Earth using a disco ball and disco ball eyes to do so. He creates the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse to judge, like the real 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And a bunch of the heroines from Earth 1, Earth 2, and Earth X fight these horsemen and this giant alien, but the Adjudicator captures them and saves them all, deciding to destroy Earth after all, but Wonder Woman lassos the truth out of him to discover what really sent him there, or something like that. It gets a little messy and a little Deus Ex Machina in the end. But so, Guido,
He has a boss, and the boss comes back.
Exactly. He just
basically
gets
the end.
he gets zapped. So, Guido, why did we read this, let's say, unusual comic?
Well, we have Tim to thank or to blame for this, because I was looking for... So there's the very classic Avengers story, Lady Liberators, perhaps coincidentally or not, also by Roy. That's from the 70s, and it is one of the earliest, or even perhaps the earliest in Marvel times, that they assemble a team of female heroes. It's not quite the deal, but it's a fun issue where he forms this team. So I asked him, for DC examples, and there are not too many. There's like the Lady Blackhawks, but I don't even know when they are from. And then, Tim, you shared this one, which any chance to read Bronze Age Wonder Woman is fun and painful. So Tim, why this one, or what do you know about this arc?
Yeah, it's one of the few times we get a lot of DC women together. Maybe the only time before, gosh, maybe the girl power books in the 90s. It's not a thing DC really put a lot of effort into. So our options were limited. But like, it's zany and fun.
Yeah.
It's the 80s for Wonder Woman were not a great time until the Perez relaunch, nor were the 70s. It was a weird limbo period where a new writer would come on every year or two and kind of reboot the whole thing. She was in the 40s for a while to match the first season of the TV show. Then they bumped her back. Steve Trevor died, came back to life, died again, merged with the Steve Trevor from a different universe. It was just, it's like 15 years of chaos. And this book is kind of par for the course, but with a lot of rad guests.
Yeah, and I know this is common with Wonder Woman, but her powers don't even seem too defined here. It's not quite clear how invulnerable or even super strong she is. There's a lot of emphasis on the power of the bracelets. The bracelets are doing a lot of the work. The bracelets and the lasso. If she didn't have those, she'd just be like a regular lady, it seems.
Yeah, that was part of the shifting teams. There was really not a consistent presentation of Wonder Woman. You saw kind of, with Superman in the 70s, like there was an effort to kind of depower him, level him out, make him more like identifiable. And that kind of stayed consistent throughout the 70s and the 80s. And then Wonder Woman was just whatever fits the story this week is what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's a weird book because there's a banner on the cover advertising that it's this big event, this Judgment in Infinity. And even on each opening splash page of the 3 issues, it says like a special 3-part miniseries. On the cover of one of them, it says starring almost everyone. Like, it felt like an event book. Like they were really trying to make it an event book. And this is pre-event books. You don't have event books at this point. So it's interesting that that's the approach they're taking. I don't know why that's happening. And then it's really underwhelming as an event book. Like, other than the splash page, there's not a lot that I enjoyed about the story or the characters. It's dry and convoluted, and the reason these characters come together is never explained. Like, I don't know why Raven and Madame Xanadu and Zatanna and Wonder Woman and Supergirl are doing this. I don't know what you both thought.
I would guess they pitched it as an event book to maybe help with sales, because Wonder Woman sales were abysmal at this point in time. So anything they could do to kind of bump it up a bit, make it a big event, bring in guest stars. It's around this time Huntress had a backup feature in Wonder Woman. So like Earth 2 Huntress, the Batman and Catwoman's daughter. So they were trying whatever they could stick into the book to make it sell better. Little of which worked. As for the story itself, like the lack of reason for why they all get together is kind of one of the things I like about it. Because comparing it to, say, Lady Liberators, which was like this very intentional women's lib feminist issue with lots of poorly done feminist rhetoric that doesn't pan out in the end. But it was very much, it's very much like the women's libs issue. This is why we're getting together, to stick it to the chauvinist male Avengers who won't let us take center stage. It's very hackneyed and bad and hilarious, but like not ideal. And this is not that. They're not getting together because they're women. They just happen to be the ones who are there, right, I guess.
Exactly.
So he's kind of, Thomas, I guess, has learned from Lady Liberators and skewed very hard in the other direction so much as to not give any reason whatsoever for why they're working together.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised. I think one thing that I could definitely say in these books' favor is that there's no, there's no moralizing there around us being women or something like that. It just is kind of presented as fact, as these are the characters that we're going to follow, and we're not going to be them being women. It doesn't play a part in the story, which actually seems in some ways actually ahead of its time. That would maybe be one of the biggest pluses these stories have going for them.
Yeah.
And any like other team up at this time, like any book where like a bunch of heroes get together, it's gonna be mostly dudes anyway, with no explanation, because that's just what the majority was. So
Totally.
it's kind of nice in that respect. The story itself doesn't pan out super great, but the idea behind it, like, let's just throw them together and not make like a thing of it, except to call it an event and make it like fancy.
Yeah.
It's an interesting approach.
Yeah, not that I wanted these books to be longer, because I didn't, but one of the things that seems to happen kind of over and over again is all the action and everything does seem very abrupt and almost cut short. And so each story has a couple of the female heroes put together to battle one of the four horsemen of apocalypse. And so, famine or plague is coming down there and everyone's getting sick or something like that. And then plague battles two of the heroes. He gets them sick a little bit, but they start to battle back. And just as they start to battle back, the adjudicator uses his disco ball eyes to bring plague back. But the battle has just kind of started there. It feels like everything is cut short. And then it almost feels like an episode of Power Rangers or something like that, where we're just seeing the same thing over and over again. Just, let's put a different horseman and a different superhero in their place and just rinse and repeat over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one ever wins. They just kind of slow them
They
down
do.
a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, the horsemen always seem like they have the upper hand, and then the heroes do like one thing that puts the horsemen back a little bit, and then the adjudicator, I guess, goes, well, that was it. They showed too much strength. It's like, I don't think so. I think you could have still won this.
You just stick it out a little longer. You could have ended the whole world.
Exactly.
Just quick to pull the trigger and take them back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's worth it for Gene Colan's art, for sure. I mean, the inking, and clearly they were rushed because they add one inker in the second issue, and then they add two more in the third issue. And by the third issue, the inking is taking away the detail of Colan's art, but the core of it's still there, and especially in the first issue, having him get to draw all of these different characters is really fun, because he is such a Bronze Age iconic artist, and even though he's obviously using DC's house style because they rarely deviated from it, you can see a little of his more horror inspired like dark shading and line work, and it comes through in a cool way, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, he really goes for it with the Four Horsemen too. Like, you can see that horror element come out.
Definitely. And before we move on, we should definitely talk about our main antagonist here, the Adjudicator, who is this giant green alien. He's in purple robes. He's got like these disco ball eyes for some reason. I guess it was the 80s. And to me, I'm wondering what you both thought. To me, he's a combination of a lot of Marvel characters. He's like the Living Tribunal, but also Galactus, because he kind of wants to destroy these worlds, but also Apocalypse.
Yeah, or the Celestials.
The Celestials, totally. And Apocalypse, because he's controlling the Four Horsemen, and there's this kind of survival of the fittest element to them. And he's all kind of mashed up in one, and then we kind of find out that the reason why he's out doing this is because he's insane, and his bosses just were like, well, let's just keep him busy and give him like a shiny object and like send him out to do things. And at the end, when he kind of realizes this, then the bosses just kind of pull him back with really no explanation. So what did you all think of the Adjudicator, his plan, the and how it ends?
Definitely not the most fleshed out villain we've had. And the ending is, yeah, so very abrupt. Like, I was skimming a little bit at that point, because,
Agreed.
again, books aren't that great. And, like, I got to the next page and he was suddenly gone. I was like, wait a second. And I had to flip back and see what happened. It's a very sudden, no, he's gone. The whatever alien beings are more powerful than them have snapped him back to from whence he came. It's like, it's a cool idea that, yeah, Marvel has done better like 20 times before this. But yeah, an actual ending would have been cool. Like, big fight might have been fun or something,
I think,
clever outsmarting.
yes, for sure. I think it's weird that he's never come back, because with every crisis, especially even now, Joshua Williamson's Dark Crisis, like, you have these people who are writing who are obsessed with DC lore and are obsessed with pulling in these little bits. And you even had creators create characters like James Tynion made the Chronicler. And it's like, well, why didn't he just use the Adjudicator? Like, he created this being for death metal that can see all the worlds and has this really cool design. It's like, why hasn't someone pulled the Adjudicator out of, like, the pre-crisis world and made a new version of him? It would actually be interesting to have him show up and have a better story told with him. But maybe, like you said, Tim,
Yeah,
people have done it better, so there's no point.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird characters from Bronze Age Wonder Woman that have just never come back. Like, as much as for the past however many decades, DC has been run by, like, diehard Silver or Bronze Age fans, it's, none of them were reading Wonder Woman. It's like a handful of people a month. Even they didn't like it that much. Not a lot from this era has carried on in any ways. And there is stuff like, yeah, the Adjudicator, if revamped and made actually interesting, could be a cool character. It's a concept that has some potential, but and no one's going back to old Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Maybe I will say the current run of Wonder Woman is tapping into, like, some old, more Golden Age stuff lately, but it seems to be a creative team that appreciates the history of the character, so maybe we'll see some other stuff back. But yeah, generally speaking, everyone just kind of ignores Rossi.
So yeah, if you're buying on speculation, maybe the Judicator won't be popping up anytime soon. Well, let's I fueled up the invisible plane, everybody. So we're going to hop in it, but it's not just a plane, it's also a time machine. So we're going to hop in the invisible plane and journey back to the 1940s to explore some multiversity.
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
And today we are asking the question, what if the DC female heroes were all fighting in World War II as a team called the Bombshells? And of course we read DC Comics Bombshells Volume 1 in trade paperback, which is issues 1 to 6 in printed form and 1 to 18 in digital form. Yes, it's confusing. These are from 2015 and are entitled Enlisted in the first arc and Combat for the second, and 1 million people were involved, right, Guido?
Not 1 million, but yes. Well, all are written by Marguerite Bennett.
Yes.
And a little background on her before I get into the artist. So Marguerite Bennett's an American writer. She actually was in Scott Snyder's graphic novel class at Sarah Lawrence, started doing some single story DC work, then the same with Marvel, launched A-Force for Marvel the same year as Bombshells for DC, and has since done some Dynamite work, some Archie work, creator-owned for Aftershock, and a title for Bad Idea, and sadly doesn't have the largest output right now. But she did the writing on all of these. The art in this volume, I'm not going to go issue by issue, is by Marguerite Sauvage, Laura Braga, Stephen Mooney, Ted Naifa, Gary Brown, Bilkis Elvely, Mirka Andolfo, Ming Doyle, Sandy Jarrell, ML Sanapo, and Mark Deering. Colorists are Marguerite Sauvage, Wendy Broom, Doug Garbark, and Kelly Fitzpatrick. Letters are all by Wes Abbott. There is cover art in this volume from Aunt Lucia, the series inspiration, and it is edited by Jim Chadwick.
And a quick summary is it's World War II, and on behalf of the U.S. military, Amanda Waller is putting together a crew of kick-ass women heroes, including Kate Kane's Batwoman, Wonder Woman, and Mira, alongside the Soviet defectors, Supergirl and Stargirl. Together with Zatanna, Catwoman, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and John Constantine as a bunny rabbit, they battle occult Nazis, led by the evil Joker's daughter and Tenebrous the Binder.
So I think before we dive into this volume specifically, Tim, what do you love about Bombshells?
I think what I love most is that it's obviously all these great female characters in a setting we haven't seen them before. But like just the idea that it's the female characters instead of the male characters. Like a lot of times when female characters take center stage, it's because the men are somehow incapacitated or sidelined or whatever. And like the book opens with the traditional Batman story. It's the Waynes in the alley, and oh no, they're gonna get shot. The Batwoman shows up and saves them, and guess what? There's no Batman in this world. It's the female characters instead, so it's just this complete revamp of the universe. The men aren't like no female character is a derivative of a male character. The female characters came first. The men either just never happened or kind of off doing their own thing elsewhere in non-superhero ways. It's just a really cool kind of way to get into this era and these characters like we've never seen before.
That's the part that surprised me the most, because I thought for sure it was going to be a League of Their Own setup. I thought for sure that the men were going to be off somewhere. And that was why we focused on the women. And so it was really interesting to enter this world where it's like, no, this is just how it is. These are all the characters, and we're not going to wonder where Superman or Batman are. But it's also not like, the Elseworlds where no men exist, which we've covered and is something else. Because you have Steve Trevor, you have men fighting the war, but like you said, the focus is on these female heroes. They're not female counterparts to male heroes, and I was surprised by that.
Yeah, and some of the characters are very similar to their main world counterparts. So Wonder Woman is very similar, Harley Quinn is very similar, but Batgirl is very different. Batwoman, I should say. Sorry, Batwoman is very different because she's not inspired by the animal. She's inspired by baseball, and she carries around a bat. And the first time we see her is a League of Their Own kind of reference where she is playing baseball because the men are all at war. But it's a kind of a cool take on that character. I actually laughed out loud when the first reveal of her using the bat happened, because I didn't know that was going to be part of her character. And it was like, oh, that's so clever.
Yeah, and a great way to explain the name, because we know Batwoman because Batman came first and she was a derivative of that. But without that Batman origin, without her, falling to a pit of bats as a child, I guess. Like there's none of that. She's just a baseball player.
Yeah.
And it works perfect. It's so simple and good and encapsulates everything I love about the book.
And
I think that's one of the... Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, and the way she speaks, I mean, I know this show takes place in the 60s, but I was really hearing
what?
Rachel Brosnahan's, how Mrs. Maisel speaks on the Fabulous Mrs. Maisel, just because that wittiness and just the having a quip for everything, because some of the book is quite serious. Obviously, it's dealing with Nazis and the Holocaust and things like that, but it's nice that you have Batwoman in there who's kind of always the quippy one, and even to the point where they're calling out that she's making these puns all the time, which I loved.
Oh, I was hearing May Clark, from the James Cagney scene with the grapefruit, and who I since have fallen in love with. May Clark, I was hearing her the whole time in my head. Any of those?
Yeah, I had an amalgam of like classic 1940s, those fast talking, his girl Friday
Totally.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
quick fire things. That's the vibe I got from her.
Well, that's what's fun. I was reading some of the interviews, of course, that Marguerite Bennett's done, and she talks about how she wanted this multi-genre book so that you have that as the pulp and action hero sequence. You have Catwoman's sequence as a noir. You have Wonder Woman's as the war film, Supergirl's as the propaganda film. You have she refers to Zatanna's as kind of a Hammer horror film. So you have all these different tones. The art shifts a bit in them, though I like that there's a consistency to the art and design, even though
Yes.
the artists are doing different things. So that was fun.
The artists kind of stick with characters as it goes on, too. So, like, Laura Braga kind of does most of the Wonder Woman-centric stuff. Berka Andolfo does most of the Harley Quinn stuff. Margaret Sovalis does, like, a lot of the Batman stuff. So they kind of stick with characters, which is nice. And then, kind of when they all come together in different moments, you get to see other people with different takes on them. But the design work is so strong, like, the way they've done the costumes is so clear and good that there's like a nice through line through everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's in the visual element, but I think even in the story, what I liked a lot about this and found really refreshing, and some of this has to do with the origin. We were talking about the fact that these are just fully established people, but the world just exists. There's not a lot of time spent explaining origins, and perhaps some of this had to do even with the medium, with these shorter digital installments that she was constructing. But you just go right in. It's a fully built world, and you don't spend a lot of time explaining details. There also doesn't seem to be, and I was, before we were recording, telling you about this book, Tim, that I read on Retcons, where they talk a lot about JSA All-Star Squadron and the way that Roy Thomas tried to fit these DC heroes into our world's history of World War II. And so you had to put everything back at the end, like, because you had to have World War II still play out that way. This world doesn't feel like it's doing that.
No.
This world feels like it's a different world. The Nazis are also zombies, and it feels like it's okay. I get the World War II references, but I'm not going to need to put all of these things back in the box for 1945 to come around or whatever. So I liked that.
Yeah, there's no later continuity it has to tie into in any way. It can just be its own thing and go absolutely wild in whatever direction it wants to go.
Yeah.
And yet, by using some actual real world things, there's also a shorthand there. So it is Nazis. It's not another fictional evil empire. So we go, oh, they're Nazis, they're evil. And the Soviets, we know, okay, they're double crossing Supergirl and Stargirl. Okay, and they're using them as propaganda. Okay, we get that. So I think if they had created fictional worlds there, a fictional evil empire that's kind of trying to take over everyone, we'd have to kind of explain that a little bit too and kind of get into that. But it's like, okay, Nazis are evil, we know it, we can jump right in, and we're using a little bit of our real worldness, but at the same time, as you're saying, it doesn't have to exist within our world's continuity, so there's also a freedom there too.
The use of real world stuff is like really judiciously done too. As much as it's like Nazi zombies and it's crazy, when it's like serious stuff that matters down the road beyond this first volume, they address it well and with good, like, some careful tact and like the kind of the heaviness it deserves. Like, there's an arc set in a Jewish ghetto in Berlin that leads to my favorite moment in the story. I think I mentioned it last time it was on, the Miriam Marvel, this different version of Mary Marvel that comes from Jewish heroines. That's her power source. The Shazam corresponds with different female heroes from Jewish lore. And it's like this very heavy depiction of, what it was like in a ghetto in the 1940s in Berlin. And it ends differently. It's Mary Marvel, and there's this huge magical ending where she's able to transport them out of Berlin and to the coast of France. They go live in Atlantis with Mira as refugees, but like it's bringing in that real world stuff in a way that really has a lot of power to it and is kind of true to the past, but then taking it in these fantastical and often moving new directions, like the reveal of Miriam Marvel as with her powers and her ability to save her entire community is just absolutely floored me the first time I read it.
Yeah, that was another thing that surprised me was there were moments, there's people dying, there's a darkness to it, a dark reality to it, and even Zatanna, whose story we barely scratched the surface of so far, but she refers to having a Jewish and a Romani parent and why that makes her a target of Nazis. And clearly her sequences are also an homage to Cabaret, which has that same kind of really good tone where it's very engaging and you can enter this world and it's a little fantastical, but it's also revealing something dark and true underneath that we have to look at.
Yes. Yeah, and even the idea that Wonder Woman then joins up with the Allies, but because she refuses to kill the Nazi prisoners and she wants to just keep them as prisoners, then she's thrown in prison. And you go, oh, that is a real world implication that would probably happen if you had superheroes like this, or superheroes used as propaganda, as we get with Stargirl and Supergirl by the Soviets.
Yeah, Bennett's good at using the history as like touchstones to kind of ground the story and then take it off in these cool new directions. It's a really well executed book in that regard.
Yeah.
And holds well through the entire run of the series. It's quite impressive.
So without spoiling the end of it, I am curious from you, Tim, like, does it resolve? Is the story that she's telling complete? I know United got canceled. I think this finished its run. Like, yeah. I don't know. Tell us a little bit about the end again without spoiling too much, because I am definitely going to go read the rest of it.
Yeah, without spoiling, and it's been a few years since I've read it, so take my recollections with a grain of salt here. I think it ends around 1943, so I don't know if we get the full extent of the war. Like, I feel like there's still more stories that could be told. A lot of the bigger, not real world stuff is taken care of, like the more supernatural elements and the other things that come in. That gets sorted. I can't recall if they just end the war 2 years early or if there's more to be told, but I think there is. I think it ended sooner than it was meant to. And so I think there is a little bit of ambiguity at the end. And then the arcs are very, very long. So like this first volume is 6 issues, but there's no real ending to it. We're really just getting started with it. So that goes on for some time. This kind of first arc gets sorted. Then there's kind of a 1942 arc, then a 1943 arc in United. So there's these big, long stories, and I think space for more if they ever wanted to go back to it. But
yeah,
this many years out, it seems unlikely.
Yeah, it feels really carefully plotted because you definitely get the sense that this is all set up for strands, that she knows where she's going over a long period of time, which is also cool because, again, format-wise, you could see this having been like all these vignettes, and it's not. They're all really building something. Even the Harley story feels like it's building to something. It's almost like a fun interlude here, and it's definitely just her and Ivy getting together. But it's like, okay, I'm gonna guess all of these strands are going to just keep building, which is cool.
Also, shout out to Bombshells. I think this is the first time Harley and Ivy actually like get together on panel.
Oh, fun.
So they end up as, I don't think it's in this first volume, but they do end up as romantic pairing like they do in main continuity. But I think this was the first place it happened, like a few years before.
It's definitely heavily hinted at in this first volume, and then of course we get we get Kate as very explicitly a lesbian and writing back to her lover partner.
To Maggie. Well, they
To
both
Mag-
are out in the main DC Earth at this
Yeah.
point. But I think I read, spoiler, that Supergirl is also in a relationship with a female Lane character. Not Lois,
Yeah,
but
there's
another Lane.
It's Eloisa Lane. It's when Marguerite Bennett writes Lois Lane, she always gives her a Cuban heritage.
Oh.
She did that Lois Lane special, I want to say like 2013 or something. I kind of introduced that, and then in Bombshells carried it on. So she's Eloisa Lane. She's not a reporter. She's like a newspaper girl.
Oh, I've seen the images, the pinup of her
Yeah,
as in like in my newsboy cap, Guido. So there you go.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think she and Supergirl have something. There's flashbacks later that reveal Wonder Woman and Mira had something
Wow.
going
Right,
on
that's
back in
right.
the
I
past. Like,
remember knowing that too.
yeah, everyone in this book is super gay, and they do not shy away from it. This first volume, pretty clear about Kate and Maggie, but as it goes on, they're not dancing around it. You don't have to read between the lines at all. It's quite clear.
Well, it's cool too. I saw in some interviews with Marguerite Bennett that she said she really wanted to have queer characters too that are just fully formed queer, and that's not the story. Like, so they're living their lives so that people can see themselves and find themselves in those stories, and it's not a conflict or anything. And so I'm excited to find that.
Our Catwoman too here is
yes, with the threesome with Lex
with Lex
Batwoman,
and that's very Cabaret, very much of the movie Cabaret, where you get this kind of threesome vibe happening in Germany. Totally.
Yeah, that's true. Before we move on from this part of Bombshells and talk about the future of Bombshells, the other thing I was thinking too is I found it hard not to think about Red Sun a little bit. I was curious if Marguerite Bennett was perhaps inspired, maybe she didn't even realize, because it's just to put Supergirl in Russia. It's hard not to see the connections to Red Sun a little bit there. So I kept thinking about that kind of almost being an Elseworlds influence on this other alternate universe.
Yeah, I could see that. And I do like that, Red Sun takes Superman decades to realize, oh, maybe this is a little bit evil. And Supergirl's like, first mission, you know what? These guys, not cool, not for me. We're getting out of here.
It was fun, too, to have Stargirl in there with her. Like, that seems a random pairing. Supergirl and Stargirl aren't, at least in my familiarity, which is not too deep of them, but they're not an obvious pair that you'd see. So that was fun to have.
Yeah, there's some unexpected team-ups that work out really well in cool ways. There's an annual later on with Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, where she's just a full-on vampire. And it just goes weird from there. It's super fun and great. Elsa Charretier does the annual.
Cool.
It's awesome.
Well, we get a great. I like how much this story does embrace the occult and magic, which we get with the Nazis and with Joker's daughter, and that all is quite sinister and evil. But then we even get a Swamp Thing cameo, which comes from the fact that Supergirl and Stargirl's adopted parents their mother was really into the idea of mythology and mystical creatures, and that Swamp Thing actually exists and protects them all. So I like that it's all embraced, while it is also next to Batwoman, who is just a woman with a baseball bat who's going around hitting people. So it has those both sides to it.
Yeah.
There's also like Big Barda just hanging out in the background.
Yeah.
She has a little more to do down the road, but like I guess Apocalypse exists here somewhere in this world.
Yeah, because she even refers to in this arc being in exile from much further away than Russia.
Yeah, or much worse than a much worse situation. Yeah. Well,
and so very cool.
And speaking of magic, I don't know if you both can see this, there's a small bunny in the corner smoking a cigarette, and he's creating a portal to the future.
A
So let's-
bisexual bunny.
A bisexual bunny smoking a cigarette, portal to the future. So let's all jump in and ponder some possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted, averted, averted?
So Guido, what are we talking about for our pondering possibilities?
Well, I wanted our focus to be on bombshells. I didn't want to go elsewhere. I didn't want to taint the experience. And so what I did is I looked at all of the places where bombshells exists, which are very few, outside of the bombshells title. So I'm going to recap some of those, and then we can talk through what we think about the potential of bombshells and the future of it. So there's a DC Universe Online 2015 downloadable story that introduces bombshells to the video game. Not going to focus on that. The three main comic places where it shows up are Harley's Little Black Book, which is actually parallel to these. So it's 2016. In issue 4, I went and read it. She is transporting in that series. It's a Connor and Palmiotti series. She's transporting two different universes in every issue. So in an issue, she ends up in the bombshells world. It's sort of fun. It ends up with Hitler killing himself. She has nightmares about Joker, and he's kind of Hitler-esque. And it's a fun little romp, but it's parallel to bombshells, so it's not really moving the bombshells universe forward. Other than that, there's only 2 that I could find appearances other than pinups and stuff, which I'm not going to bother with. So in Wonder Woman 750, which is the anniversary issue from 2020, there is a brief story by Marguerite Bennett that sort of summarizes and reintroduces each character from Bombshells in just a fun little story in that anthology. And then other than that, in Dark Knight's Death Metal Rise of the New God in late 2020, there is one in the backup story of that issue. They're gathering these multiversal heroes, and there is Kate Kane, Bombshell's Kate Kane. But that is her only appearance. There's no plot. There's nothing else. And that's it. There's no animated series, shockingly. There's no animated movie, shockingly. There's just nothing else. So what do you both think of that? Tim, were you familiar with any of those minor, unimportant appearances of Bombshells?
Yeah, I remember the one from Wonder Woman 750 because I was very excited to see it. It's been so long since I've seen any Bombshells. I think, did Laura Braga draw that? Was she back?
I think so. It looked like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Laura Braga is the one who had drawn most of the original Wonder Woman Bombshell stuff. So that was really cool. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of got to be what it is. Like, every now and again, like a special anthology issue or something, they'll show up. And maybe like, guess in the next couple of years it'll be like the 10th anniversary of Bombshells. Maybe they'll do something cool.
Yeah, I was wondering that too, if next year being the 10 years from the collectibles line, if they do something.
I mean, reading this, I was just shocked that there hasn't been an animated series or animated movie. We just recently had Megan Fitzmartin on the podcast, who wrote the new recent JSA World War Society World War II movie, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this would be such a great kind of companion, alternate world companion to that story, and I think especially works so well in animation as opposed to live action, not only because of budgets and you're dealing with having these big demons and zombies and World War II, that could be really pricey, but just getting the style, the look, even though it's all these different artists, the look, that pinup look is so key to the success of this. So I would just be shocked that there isn't something in the animated world.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if there's something with the rights that were constructed because it started as a collectibles line. Obviously they own the rights, but I don't know if Aunt Lucia gets a percentage of everything Bombshells, and so they're sort of not incentivized. It's just strange to me, again, going back to like Josh Williamson's Dark Crisis and the way that there have been major stories, Death Metal included, that are pulling the multiverse. Their Infinite Frontier was doing that. Like now they're really pulling all these characters from throughout the multiverse And somehow the bombshells just aren't showing up in that. And they're so ripe for it. They're great designs. They're unique designs. They're fully formed characters. You could drop them into a battle and it would just be fun to see them. And for some reason, they're not doing that. And I can't understand it.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the digital first stuff they've done over the past decade kind of stays just in its lane over there. Like there's not a huge amount of crossover between what they do there and what they do elsewhere. Like there was the Renee DeLiz Legend of Wonder Woman book that's not really like that version of the character, another World War II setting. That's not really shown up anywhere else. Any of the stuff they've done with like the adaptations, like they had that Wonder Woman 77 comic that was super good. But like, so obviously they got the rights to like Linda Carter. They could stick her different places and they haven't.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, they just don't seem to be tying it in like they do with everything else.
Yeah.
they own.
And time and the zeitgeist seem to have be in Bombshell's favor since 2016. It greater emphasis on female representation, on queer representation. Also now we have major celebrities that are kind of pretty pro-Hitler, so maybe a book that's also anti-fascist, anti-Nazi would maybe now is the time to reintroduce that. So
That's
seems
true. Gosh, this is pre-2016.
yeah,
Wow,
so
yeah.
it seems like everything is ripe for this to emerge now in 2023 when we're recording this. So it seems like an odd decision to not put this back out into the world in one form or another.
Well, there have been these two huge Pride anthologies from DC that why wasn't there a Bombshell story in one of them? Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been good. Maybe James Gunn could
That's
super into
true.
it.
Yeah.
Make something. Because everything at DC seems to be in flux right now. So whatever we knew as the standard operating procedure for how Warner Brothers makes decisions about shows and movies and stuff seems to be a little bit out the window. So maybe we'll get something cool like Bombshells.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Totally.
And I do hope that the publication side has some plans for the 10-year. I really do. Because it looks like, too, only the Funko Pops are sort of the thing that's still coming out. You mentioned you had some of the action figures. Are those from the McFarlane, like the highly detailed ones?
No, these are like old DC Direct ones.
Oh.
They came out probably 3 or maybe even 5 years ago now. It's been a while.
Oh, so I wonder, maybe there aren't even some of the really highly articulated, like, collector action figures that have been coming out the last few years. Because I only found
I don't
Pops.
think I don't think McFarlane has done any Bombshell stuff. McFarlane doesn't do a lot of female characters. So, there is that.
I wonder why.
And the statues seem to stop around 2020, I think, was the last statue. So it seems to have tapered off a little bit.
But yeah, when you go to a New York Comic Con, or well, I haven't been to San Diego, but going to a Comic Con, you see so many female presenting people as these Bombshell characters, which is just really cool, and that's definitely grown so much more in recent years. So hopefully that shows people that there is that fan community. So maybe when DC is wandering the aisles like they did when they first discovered Bombshells, they'll see, oh, look at all these people dressed up as these characters.
Right. Oh, people liked that. Yeah. So anything that we want to wrap up with? What did this trip through the multiverse tell us and help us understand about DC's female heroes? Tim, you're the expert on this. What tell us.
Yeah, DC's female heroes seem to be best when DC lets creators do interesting things in their own weird, unique ways. So like letting Marguerite Bennett do what amounts to almost like 50 print issues, I think, of this huge, expansive, epic story, presenting these female characters in such a new, different way. Like, it's so fun and so awesome and so different, and seemed to be like kind of left alone in its own little corner of the DC universe to do whatever it wants. And that's one of the best ways to get good stories, especially with female characters, because otherwise, when you get all the editors and brass involved, it kind of tends to not go well.
Yeah.
So it's not a thing that happens a lot, because DC is very protective of its IP. But when it does happen, you get something pretty great and magical.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, they haven't even had, like, I'm thinking about A-Force now and some of the recent Marvel attempts, like even Marvel's done the Women's History Month issue. I don't feel like DC's done a lot of that. I think DC as a whole is telling a lot more progressive, inclusive, and diverse stories than Marvel. But when it comes to female characters, I'm trying to think of other examples of them building like a female team. And other than Wonder Woman, The Trial of the Amazons, you know, fleshing out Wonder Girl and Yara Flora and Nubia and getting all these characters going, I haven't seen too much in that way. So I think we do need another creator who's given a lot of freedom to tell some story with a bunch of the characters we know and love.
Yeah, we have Batgirls as a team at least now.
Oh, yeah.
Cass and Steph and Barbara together. That's a pretty fun book.
That's true. That's right.
Marvel's not got a lot. Captain Marvel is a Captain Marvel series, but like it tends to have a lot of
supporting characters.
Other female characters in this, like Spider-Woman's in a lot. There's I think a new one called Asthmatic.
And there's like, Binary there's a lot of, too. That I love that they created that character. Yeah, and Carol's half sister. Yeah, L'Oreal.
Yeah, it's a great book for like working in female characters, but like it's not a female team book because Marvel really doesn't do that anymore.
Well, that's a good example where
I love that book.
I suspect Kelly Thompson was given that flexibility, and she's the right person. You know, there are a lot of things about Kelly Thompson's writing that actually remind me of Marguerite Bennett. They both have that lightness and fun, and they're telling these really good classic comic stories while doing fun things, and often with female characters and queer stories. So I love them both. So yeah, well,
yeah, they're both great at like things that seem like fun superhero adventures, and then like out of the blue you get like a gut punch of, oh yeah, that's you got me there. Well played.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping for more bombshells, but at least I know I have the next 40 issues to read, so I'm excited about that. Yeah. So I think that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. And Tim, can you share with people where they can find you, follow you, and remind them the book that makes the best gift for every comic book lover this holiday season?
I am at Tim Hanley01 on Twitter for as long as Twitter continues to survive. Should it collapse, I will be at Tim Hanley01 elsewhere. Whatever comes out of its ashes, or you can go to my website, thanley.wordpress.com. If you are looking for a excellent Christmas gift this year, my new book, Not All Supermen, is available wherever books are sold. Check it out. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of a bummer, because it's about sensitive touch masculinity. But it's, it's got good moments, too.
Well, you also have all those incredible books. You have the Lois Lane book, the Catwoman book, the Wonder Woman book. Do any of those have bombshells in them, or are they all pre-bombshells when you're writing?
Think the Lois book might mention bombshells offhand. The Wonder Woman one doesn't. I think the Catwoman very offhand.
Well, they're all still great histories of those characters that people should check out, and those are also really great gifts and companions to the Bombshells comic.
Our reading list is in the show notes if you want to read more about Bombshells and our weird Wonder Woman comics that we also read. And you can, of course, follow us on all social media at Dear Watchers.
Yes, and leave a review wherever you listen. We'll be back with you soon for another trip through the multiverse.
And in the meantime, in the words of Uatu, keep pondering the possibilities.